Mr. Kinlan conceded that the cause of the accident was a failure to inspect, maintain, and repair the limousine. That's what Mr. Chase said. That responsibility is the exclusive duty and responsibility of Nauman Hussain. That's his client's responsibility, exclusively, by statute and regulation. Mr. Kinlan said that this brake line, People's Exhibit 325, was the brake line that Mavis said they replaced. No, this is not the brake line that Mavis said it replaced. Chikizi Okuro testified he replaced the left rear caliper and the hydraulic hose that went to that caliper. You can see a hydraulic hose in this photograph, People's 325. It's this rubber piece to the left of the hose. It's not the metal brake line, and it's not the metal brake line that he replaced because Chikizi Okuro could never get under the vehicle because the lift at the Mavis station could not elevate the vehicle sufficiently that he felt safe going under it. The hydraulic line, which Chikizi Okuro replaced, was accessible as he squatted down and knelt down, took the tire off, and operated on the car, worked on the car on his knees. He said, "I'm getting on my knees," and he made a very off-color remark. He never went under the car because it was unsafe to go under the car. Mr. Kinlan quoted Virgil. He said, Virgil said to Nauman, "We replaced the calipers and the hoses." That's right, the hoses, the rubber hydraulic hoses, not the metal brake line, not the steel brake line, not the rusted and delaminated brake line. They replaced the hoses. That was what Virgil told him. He never mentioned the steel brake line. Whether or not those rubber hoses were ever replaced is of no moment. We know that because Mr. Chase told us what happened at Mavis had nothing to do with the cause of this accident. Nothing to do with the cause of the accident. Mr. Kinlan complains that the master cylinder was never replaced. Brian Chase showed you that the master cylinder was perfectly operational. In fact, the photograph that Mr. Kinlan used showed two master cylinders side by side. In the one that came from the vehicle, the rubber black ring inside was depressed, indicating that the brakes were applied at the time of the accident. On the other one, the new one, that rubber ring was more forward in its bore, because being new, it hadn't been used yet. The master cylinder was operational. So whether Mavis replaced it or not, again, is of no moment. Mr. Kinlan said that Duffy never got under the vehicle. Both Chad Smith and Martin Duffy explained to us the different types of inspections that are done on motor vehicles. Duffy saw the Ford Excursion stretch limousine in the parking lot on Weibel Avenue where these vehicles were stored. He said the clearance beneath the vehicle that day was 9 inches, unsafe for him to get under. How is a proper inspection conducted? Through the use of a lift or a pit to get under the vehicle safely to look at all of its component parts. Mr. Kinlan said that the regulations imposed an impossible standard upon Nauman Hussain. An impossible standard, and that Nauman could not follow that standard. Well, Mr. Cottrell sat in that chair and told us how Albany Transport did it. In fact, he showed us his brake pull sheets, and he showed us his monthly preventative maintenance sheets, and told us how he did it at Albany Transport. He's been doing that for 31 years. And as far as the standards being impossible to follow, Mr. Chase said he sat at the help desk where he fielded phone calls from carriers and citizens about the regulations. Look at the extent to which Mr. Chad Smith helped Nauman Hussain. As you may recall, and we're going to get to it, he even helped him correct his DOT regulation by sending in the paperwork for the man. He sent in Nauman Hussain's paperwork to US DOT to correct the registration information with respect to how many businesses he had under his father's name, Schoharie Hussain. That's not impossible. It's unfair to characterize it as impossible. The proof in this case contradicts that. Mr. Kinlan says that Nauman Hussain brought the vehicle to a respectable national business, Mavis Discount Tire. Well, at that respectable national business, Mr. Hussain engaged in a conversation with Virgil Park after the vehicle had been fixed or not fixed, however you want to choose to look at that, on May 10. And this is what Virgil Park, representative of the major national corporation, told him. Tranny fluid and brake fluid don't mix. It's going to break down. With respect to the vehicle, burn it. This is from a man who makes money by fixing his vehicle. He told him to take it off the road in sum and substance. Burn it, he said. Sometime down the road, it's going to happen. There, Virgil was talking about the presence of the transmission fluid in the brake line, that the brakes were going to fail because the transmission fluid eats away at the rubber seals in the brake line system. You're fighting the inevitable. Tranny fluid and brake fluid are night and day difference. Starts a chemical reaction inside the line, which damages the seals, causes the system to fail. This is from Virgil Park, from the national respectable corporation. Nauman Hussain chose not to follow that advice. Virgil Park, I'm not guaranteeing nothing. He's saying these words to the motor carrier operator who puts people into his limousine and drives them around the Capital District. I'm not guaranteeing nothing with respect to your brake system on your limousine. "50-50 shot of it picking up again. Right now it's on the floor." He's talking about the brake pedal on the limousine involved in this crash. You have a 50-50 shot that it might work. Right now your brake pedal's on the floor. Again, he made the comment, light it on fire, take it off the road. And Mr. Hussain ignored that advice. Mr. Kinlan said, how wouldn't Nauman know that the brakes hadn't been fixed by Mavis? The simple question to that is, by having it inspected at a New York State, by a New York State certified DOT inspector. That's how you check. That's how you know. That's how the system is set up. The vehicle can be worked on by anyone. But after it's worked on, it has to be inspected by a DOT certified inspector before it can even get operating authority. And thereafter, it has to be inspected every 6 months. And in the intervening 6 months between the inspections, you have to have a preventative maintenance schedule approved by DOT. Mr. Cottrell showed us his. And in 1 month, his schedule was set up for every 2,000 miles or every 30 days. In 1 month, his vehicle, it was this vehicle as a matter of fact, he had to do the inspection twice because it went beyond 2,000 miles. I think it was in April of 2015. He did the preventative maintenance inspection twice. He had the paperwork to back that up. That's how it's done. Mr. Kinlan said, why does Nauman Hussain have all of this responsibility? Because it was his choice to become a motor carrier operator in New York State. It was his choice to have in his fleet, in his group of vehicles, a vehicle that had a seating capacity of 16 persons or more, including driver, and then to use that vehicle to transport passengers for hire. He met the textbook definition and acted inconsistently therewith, and so therefore he was subject to the regulation. That's why those regulations were placed upon him, because of his choice. He chose the business, he was obligated, and then he chose not to follow those regulations. Mr. Kinlan questioned what Chikezi Okoro did with the left rear caliper. Chase confirmed that the other calipers on the vehicle had corrosion and rust. That would be left front, right rear. Left rear, the one that Chikezi Okoro replaced, Mr. Chase told us it was more recent. The corrosion upon that unit was less. It would indicate that it had been recently replaced. Chad Smith did a visual inspection of the vehicle sometime after May 10. I will get to that in my remarks. And he noticed that there were shiny parts on the left rear wheel, consistent with some type of repair having been made on that wheel. That's what Chikezi did. Chikezi replaced the caliper, and he replaced the hydraulic hose and not the steel brake line. Mr. Kinlan suggests that Mr. Klingman should have told Nauman Hussain that he needed to have the vehicle inspected by a DOT inspector. That was in May of 2018. How many times had Nauman Hussain spoken to Chad Smith by that time? How many emails had he received telling him this vehicle needs to be inspected by a DOT inspector? He had met with him face-to-face on the 21st day of March, 2 months before, and told him he needed a DOT inspection. He had sent him emails telling him he needed a DOT inspection. And Mr. Kinlan is going to fault Klingman for not telling him? That's news that man already had. Mr. Hussain was well aware of his responsibilities. In fact, he was so keenly aware of his responsibilities with respect to DOT that you'll find in evidence at Exhibit 280, it's a list of Craigslist postings. A list of Craigslist postings. And you're free to look at these when you retire to the jury room. And in the Craigslist postings, Mr. Hussain put the Ford Excursion stretch limousine up for sale. And in his sales pitch to get somebody to buy that limousine, he stated that it was DOT ready. The Ford Excursion stretch limousine was DOT ready. That certainly implies knowledge, one would think. He made those postings on November 29, 2017, January 29, 2018, April 2, 2018. This is before the vehicle arrived at the Mavis garage and before the time that Mr. Kinlan suggests that Mr. Klingman should have told him about DOT. He was well aware. He was using the DOT regulations to help sell the vehicle. Mr. Kinlan conceded in his summation any normal inspection would have discovered the problems with the brakes. Any normal inspection would have discovered the problem with the brakes. That's right. Any would. Any DOT inspection, any preventative maintenance inspection, would have discovered the problem with these brakes. But neither of those things happened. I'd like to talk about the proof in this case. The proof showed that Nauman Hussain operated a business in Saratoga County, a limo business, at least since the spring of 2015 up through October 6, 2018. The limo business operated under three names: Prestige Limo and Chauffeur Service, Hazy Limousine, and Saratoga Luxury Limo. The business operated the Ford Excursion that we've talked so much about, that had a unique VIN number, vehicle identification number. The number first appeared in a title of the original owner. That number is found in Exhibit 45. And then that same number, the VIN number, and what we're doing here is identifying this vehicle throughout the course of these transactions. The same number appears on significant documents throughout the case. Chad Smith testified that the vehicle had a seating capacity of more than 18 passengers. And if used for hire, and because it was used for hire, Nauman Hussain would be deemed a motor carrier operator and subject to state and federal regulation. As a motor carrier operator, the regulations to which Nauman Hussain was subjected was not voluntary. It was mandatory. It was mandatory. It was not optional. If you're in that business, you're regulated, and that's it. The evidence showed that the control of this business was exclusively in the hands of Nauman Hussain. Exhibit 42 is a DBA, a doing business as form, that was filed for Hazy Limo with the Saratoga County Clerk. Marcy Albano testified that she performed web design services for Nauman Hussain's limo business. She created a limousine website for limousine services in the Saratoga area. The site gathered leads. Marcy would take the leads and then give them to people in the business, trying to attract business. She gave some leads to Nauman Hussain. He used them, and they developed a business relationship. She told us that she contacted Nauman Hussain routinely by telephone. The numbers which she gave us was 518-879-3039 and 518-365-5043. Those numbers will come up with subsequent witnesses. She also contacted him through two different emails. One was hazylimousine@yahoo.com. The other was info@saratogaluxurylimo.com. And interestingly, the leads worked out so well for Nauman Hussain, those leads given to him by Marcy Albano, that he asked her for permission to take her website, which was Saratoga Luxury Limo, and incorporate that into a website for himself, and she allowed him to do that. In 2016, a DBA form was filed in Saratoga County for Saratoga Luxury Limo. Michael Grasso told us that Nauman Hussain contacted him to obtain insurance for the limo. And I'm talking about the Ford Excursion stretch limousine. The insurance which Mr. Grasso provided to the Ford Excursion had the same VIN number as the VIN number found on the Ford Excursion. Mr. Nauman Hussain insured the vehicle as a 16-passenger vehicle with Mr. Grasso. Mr. Grasso told us that he only did business with Nauman Hussain, no one else. James Pachter testified. He was a driver. He drove for Mr. Hussain for a number of months, maybe a year and a half. He was interviewed by Mr. Hussain and hired by Mr. Hussain. Mr. Hussain gave Mr. Pachter jobs, he explained the routes and the itineraries, and he paid Mr. Pachter. Mr. Pachter told us that Nauman Hussain did not insist or require that his drivers do pre-trip or post-trip inspections as required by DOT regulation. Carol Stevens testified. She managed the Crest Inn, located at 776 Route 9 in Gansevoort, New York. Ms. Stevens told us that she would pay the drivers that Mr. Nauman Hussain hired to drive his limousines. Investigator Erica Hawk testified. She spoke to she dialed a phone number on October 6, 2018. That's the day of the crash, and this is after the crash. She dialed 518-306-7663 and spoke to a man who answered the phone, and she had found this phone number doing an internet website search for Prestige Limousine. That man identified himself as Nauman Hussain and said that he was running the limousine company for his father while his father was unavailable. That man gave Investigator Hawk his personal cell phone to call her. That number, 518-365-5043, the same number that Marcia Albano had. Investigator Michael Burns, later that day, October 6, 2018, met with Nauman Hussain. He admitted to Investigator Burns of the State Police that he was operating the limousine business, while his father was out of the country. Trooper David Roy met with Mr. Nauman Hussain on August 25, 2018, at the ice rink on Weibel Avenue in Saratoga Springs. Nauman Hussain told Trooper Roy that he was the owner of the company that employed Scott Lisanicchia on that day to drive the Ford Excursion stretch limousine that Trooper David Roy had pulled over or otherwise stopped at the track at Saratoga that day. Donald Cottrell still works at Advantage Transport in Albany. He manages the mechanics and oversees the maintenance of that limo fleet. Excuse me. He remembers meeting with 3 Hussains in the year 2016. He remembers the father and the 2 sons. He remembers the father purchasing the Ford Excursion stretch limousine in 2016, and in evidence is Exhibit 44, the title to the vehicle, which again has the same VIN number as previous documents. Mr. Cottrell also recalled speaking to Nauman Hussain, whom he identified in court, and he told the young man about operating authority and the regulations of New York State. He had that phrase, that memorable phrase. He said of the Department of Transportation, "They are nice people, but don't play with them." He told Nauman Hussain about operating authority. He told him about the preventative maintenance program that would be expected of him. He gave Nauman Hussain the names of DOT personnel that Nauman Hussain should contact in 2018, just as the vehicle was being purchased. James Pachter, the driver. He told Nauman that Nauman Hussain needed operating authority to operate the Ford Excursion stretch limousine. Mr. Pachter was a duly licensed CDL driver with a lot of experience. At the same time he was working for Mr. Hussain, he had 2 other jobs. He's well versed in the rules and regulations of the New York State Department of Transportation. Interestingly, when Mr. Pachter told Mr. Hussain, "You need operating authority for this vehicle," Mr. Pachter told us that Mr. Hussain's response was, "Oh no, I'm using this as a passenger vehicle," indicating that Mr. Hussain knew the difference. When Pachter said this should be regulated, in sum and substance, he says, "No, it shouldn't. It's a passenger vehicle. It was registered as a passenger vehicle." Chad Smith had his first contact with the Ford Excursion on June 8 of 2017. He was returning to his office in Albany and decided to drive through Saratoga Springs. When he did so, he drove past the Mavis Discount Tire Store, and he noticed the Ford Excursion stretch limousine in the lot. And he told us that he was familiar with a lot of limousines. He also told us that a limousine of that size, in his opinion, should have DOT numbers on it and the name of the business. This one did not. So he stopped and he looked at the vehicle. He got the license plate number and he got the VIN number. While running this on his computer in his car, he noted that through the registration, through the VIN number, that the prior person who registered the vehicle had it listed as 18. The then current person who registered it, that would be Schoharie Hussain, DBA Prestige Limo and Chauffeur Service, had the seating capacity listed as 11. And this caused Mr. Smith to think something here might be amiss. In chronological order, on November 29, 2017, it was the first time that Mr. Hussain placed the ad in Craigslist to sell the vehicle, indicating that it was DOT ready. Back to Mr. Smith for a moment. When he saw the vehicle in the parking lot and checked the VIN number and found out that the seating capacity had been changed from one owner to the next, he sent an email to Hazy Limousine at yahoo.com. This is Exhibit 55 in evidence. Mr. Hussain, please be advised that a vehicle registered to you was found with a valid registration. The vehicle, VIN number, I'm not going to recite it, shows a registration as an 11-passenger Ford. This vehicle, if used to transport passengers for compensation, would require NYS DOT authority. Your operations do not currently have NYS DOT authority, and your company will be subject to enforcement action if found to be transporting passengers for compensation in this vehicle. The transportation of passenger in a for-hire capacity within New York State in vehicles with a seating capacity of more than 10 passengers, including the driver, generally requires an NYS DOT certificate of authority. If you operate NYS DOT regulated vehicles, those vehicles will require an NYS DOT bus inspection. These will be required before your certificate to operate from NYS DOT is granted. If you operate NYS DOT regulated vehicles, NYS DMV requires that you only utilize 19A certified drivers. This would generally require drivers to have a minimum of a CDL Class C with a passenger endorsement. Hyperlinks, additional hyperlinks were available, were included in that email for additional information. On January 5, 2018, Chad Smith, while on the internet searching for limousine companies in the Saratoga area, stumbles upon a website for Saratoga Luxury Limo. He hadn't noticed this before. The website had a screenshot, and he noticed that the limousine in the screenshot looked like the limousine he had seen in June in the Mavis parking lot. He explained to us how he enlarged the photograph, got the license plate, and then confirmed that it was indeed the same vehicle. he decides he suspects that that Saratoga Luxury Limousine is holding itself out as a motor carrier operator without DOT authority, which is against the law. And so he sends an email in an attempt to gather proof to write a violation. He solicits a trip for 13 people on the Hazy Limousine website. He receives an email back from someone who's signed his name Sean with an email address of info@Saratoga Luxury Limo. In that email, it confirms that the trip is scheduled for 5 hours and 13 people to be picked up at the Saratoga Hilton at 10 a.m. At the bottom of the email are the words Saratoga Luxury Limo and the phone number of 518-306-7663. That email was dated January 5, 2018, and it is in evidence. On January 8, 2018, Chad Smith telephones the number 518-306-7663 and asks to speak to Schoharie Hussain. That's the number on the registration for the stretch limo. The answering person, or the person answering, confirmed that he was Schoharie Hussain. That person also confirmed the license plate for the vehicle and confirmed the VIN number for the vehicle. The same day, Chad Smith sent a follow-up email confirming the conversation, and he said in his email that a notice of violation would follow because that company was holding itself out as a motor carrier operator without the proper authority. The email also sought to schedule an inspection for the vehicle to take place on January 12, 2019. That was a typo error that Chad Smith explained to us. But in that email, there was some very important language. And that language was this: you are hereby advised to cease any transportation of passengers for compensation in any larger vehicles, including any vehicle that has a seating capacity of over 10 passengers, including the driver. That was Chad Smith to Hazy Limousine on January 8, 2018. Told clearly, coldly, without question, you cannot operate this vehicle without authority. And again, he was trying to set up an inspection to take place on January 12. He had the wrong year. So on January 12th, he sent us another email confirming the inspection would take place on that day, and he receives an email in return from Sean that states, I apologize, but the vehicle has been moved to Mavis for some exhaust work. It's at the Mavis Discount Tire in downtown Saratoga Springs. Thank you, Sean. info@SaratogaLuxuryLimo.com. Phone number 518-306-7663. Same day, on January 12th, Mr. Smith calls that number and asks to speak to Schoharie. The person answers the phone yes, as in he is Schoharie. Schoharie, or the person who identified himself as Schoharie, told Mr. Smith that the vehicle was at Mavis. So Smith follows up by driving to Mavis and saw the Ford Excursion at the Mavis lot. He spoke to an employee and confirmed that the vehicle was there for repairs. "17 days later, on January 29, 2018, Nauman Hussain places another advertisement on Craigslist in an attempt to sell the Ford Excursion stretch limousine and uses the language DOT ready, because he knows what DOT ready means. Because he knows that vehicles such as this are subject to DOT authority and DOT regulation, and that's the message that he's communicating to a would-be buyer. (3/15/18), it's March 15, 2018. Mr. Smith calls the number 518-306-7663, asks to speak to Shaheed, and the party answers yes. They agree that the vehicle will be inspected on March 21, 2018 at the Weibel Avenue lot. Mr. Smith again discussed with the person that he had on the phone the requirements of DOT operating authority for that vehicle, the Ford Excursion stretch limousine. On March 15, 2018, Mr. Smith sent an email to hazylimousine@yahoo.com. This is confirming the inspection which took place earlier that day. This is Exhibit 66 in evidence. In regards to our conversation about applying for NYS DOT authority, please see the attached application. He's providing Mr. Hussain with an application for the authority that Mr. Hussain needs to operate his business. Submitting the application does not allow you to operate in regulated transportation. You must go through the wait period and submit evidence of all compliances before you will be granted your authority to operate. Once you have submitted your application, if you wish to check on the status of your NYS DOT authority, you can contact Brian Tracy, he gives a number, or Mary Bisio, he gives a number, or check by email, and he gives an email address. Then he follows with, if they do not return your phone calls, you can contact me, and I can check with staff to determine what the status is. I misspoke. That letter was sent on, the email was sent on March 15. The inspection wouldn't take place till 6 days later, on March 26th. March 21st, excuse me. On March 21st, Mr. Smith travels to Weibel Avenue, parks his car. He arrived there first. A vehicle drives up. A man gets out of the vehicle, and Mr. Smith says to the man, Shaheed Hussain? And the individual said, yes, as in, I am Shaheed Hussain. That individual was Nauman Hussain. But he confirmed with Mr. Smith that he was Shaheed Hussain. Mr. Smith discussed with this person, who identified himself as Shaheed, compliance matters and specifically operating authority. Mr. Smith then conducts an inspection of the vehicle. And Mr. Smith finds what was photographed as People's Exhibit 71, vice grips on the hydraulic hose on the back left wheel of the Ford Excursion stretch limousine. That's the hydraulic hose that Chikizia Koro would replace in about 2 months. This hydraulic hose with the vice grips attached to it supplies hydraulic fluid to the left caliper, to the caliper on the left rear wheel, the caliper that Chikizia Koro would replace in about 2 months. Mr. Smith finds a number of violations with respect to the vehicle. No operating authority. Improper license plate. Carrier not certified through the 19A bus driver unit. Door. He found that 25% of the effective. Left side. Violation. One was the emergency exit, and as well as the FMVSS tag. Those two violations would again be found in September. The exact same two violations were to be found, will be found again in the September inspection. After the inspection is conducted, Mr. Smith goes over each of the violations with the person who identified himself as Schoharie Hussain. And he gave to that individual, Schoharie Hussain, an information packet. We've got a copy of one. It's People's Exhibit 69, and it is in evidence. The information packet is entitled Compliance Guide, Federal and State Motor Carrier Safety Regulations. Later that day, March 21, Mr. Smith sends a follow-up email to hazylimousine@yahoo.com. Exhibit 68 in evidence. Please find attached two separate inspection reports for your vehicles. The items in bold are items that need to be corrected before the vehicle can be used in commerce. The other items would be items that would be included in our NYS DOT bus inspection that could keep your vehicle from passing. Keep in mind that I was not able to put your vehicles on a lift and therefore may not have seen all items underneath your vehicle. The type of inspection that Mr. Smith conducted did not use a lift. The fact that a lift was not used is identified in this correspondence, and it's telling Mr. Hussain that there could be other defects not visible from the type of inspection he had conducted on that date. Mr. Hussain is on notice repeatedly. A few days later, April 2, 2018, another Craigslist posting. The stretch limousine is for sale, and it's advertised as DOT ready. August 2, 2018. Let me back up. The Craigslist posting, keeping this in chronological order, from April 2, 2018, was again repeated on June 6, 2018. Same advertisement, same claim, the vehicle is DOT ready. That advertisement was again run on July 27, 2018. Same language. The vehicle is DOT ready. On August 2, Mr. Smith calls the carrier at 518-306-7663. Shahid, the person answering, says yes. They again discuss DOT authority. Mr. Smith then sends two emails, one to hazylimousine@yahoo.com and another, info@SaratogaLuxuryLimo.com. Those two emails are also in evidence. Mr. Smith receives a reply email from Hazy Limousine. In that email, it's requested, can you send me application for the can you send me application for the numbers for DOT for my smaller limos? Mr. Smith replies, unfortunately, the only way you can apply for the the US DOT number online, you would need to go to, and he gives the address, the email address for the DOT online site. On August 26, Mr. Smith told us that he learned that the Ford Excursion stretch limousine had been inspected by DOT personnel. And at this point, we turn our attention to Trooper Roy, because Trooper Roy had stopped the vehicle in Saratoga Springs at the track. When he stopped the vehicle, he asked the driver, Scott Lissanikia, to remove the vehicle to a safer place because it was very busy at the track. They went to the ice skating rink again on Weibel Avenue. While at the ice skating rink, Nauman Hussain shows up, and he identifies himself as Nauman Hussain. While there, Trooper Roy explains to Scott Lissanikia and Nauman Hussain that Scott Lissanikia does not have a P endorsement on his license, that he cannot drive this vehicle. Trooper Roy took Scott Lissanikia out of service. He made it very clear. You don't have the endorsement, you cannot drive this vehicle. Nauman is present and hears this. On August 26th, after learning of this contact with DOT personnel, Chad Smith calls the number 518-306-7663. Someone answers. Mr. Smith says, Shahid, and the person answered yes. They discussed an upcoming inspection of the Ford Excursion stretch limousine. On August 27, 2018, Mr. Smith sends an email to hazylimousine@yahoo.com confirming that there's going to be a roadside inspection to take place on September 4, 2018 at 10 a.m. On August 27, that's the same day, Smith receives an email from Sean at hazylimousine@yahoo.com confirming that 10 a.m. is fine. See you then. On September 1, 2018, Scott Sherman had a wedding. Scott Sherman ordered a limousine Scott Lisinicki showed up at that wedding. Scott Lisinicki was driving the vehicle, the Ford Excursion stretch limousine. Scott Lisinicki was an out-of-service driver. He had been taken out of service 5 or 6 days before. In evidence is Scott Lisinicki's CDL and driving abstract. Scott Lisinicki never got the P endorsement. Scott Lisinicki was driving the vehicle 5 days after he was told not to drive it. Scott Lisinicki was driving the vehicle 5 days after Nauman Hussain was told not to allow this man to drive the vehicle. He doesn't have the proper endorsement. He cannot drive the vehicle. Yet, Scott Lisinicki was the driver for the Scott Sherman wedding. On September 4, Chad Smith drives to the lot in Saratoga on Weibel Avenue to inspect the Ford Excursion stretch limousine for a second time. When Trooper Roy stopped Scott Lisinicki and then met with Nauman Hussain, Nauman Hussain's name appeared in the paperwork. That paperwork was accessible to Chad Smith. So when he meets at the lot with an individual who drives up and says, Shahid Hussain? The person answered yes. Chad Smith says, well then, who's Nauman Hussain? And at that point, the defendant says, it is me. Mr. Smith is confused, and the defendant explains that he has permission to run his father's business. He has permission to act as his father and conduct business in his father's name. Chad Smith also notices that there's a new license plate on the Ford Excursion stretch limousine. This is Toga Lux 1. From here we have to digress to the testimony of Mr. Patorti. Patorti is the deputy director at DMV. He identified for us a registration application in evidence as People's Exhibit 375. That application was filed on May 25, 2018. That application was bearing license number Toga Lux 1, and in the application it stated that the seating capacity for the vehicle was 10. Yet attached to the application was an insurance card. The insurance card was necessary in order to register it. You have to prove that the vehicle is insured. The seating capacity on the insurance card was 16. Yet the vehicle is being registered as a 10 as far as seating capacity goes. We don't know for sure who filed those papers, but we know that Nauman Hussain had authority to act for his father on that date because he told Chad Smith that when he met with him on September 4th. He had authority to act and conduct business on behalf of his dad. Nauman Hussain had also made the same comment would also make the same comment, I should say, about a month later when he spoke on the phone with Erica Hawk, and he would also make the same comment to Investigator Burns about a month later when he told him that he was operating the business while his father was out of the country. On this date, September 4, 2008, Nauman Hussain gave Chad Smith a DOT number. It was the first time that he had seen it. Smith conducted his inspection that day and found a number of violations involving the Ford Excursion stretch limousine. Without going through that list, there were 2 out-of-service violations that are identical with the out-of-service violations from March 21, 2018. Those being window inoperable, rear compartment right side emergency door inoperable, and the FMVSS sticker missing. After conducting the inspection, Mr. Smith follows up with an email to hazylimousine@yahoo.com. Exhibit 78 in evidence. Please see the attached copies of the inspection reports for the vehicles that I inspected earlier today. Please review the reports and note that out-of-service items are indicated in bold with a Y in the OOS column. These violations need to be corrected before the vehicle can be used on the roadways in New York State. Your larger vehicle requires NYS DOT authority and a NYS DOT bus inspection to operate legally in NYS. You can VICIO, number given, for information on how to continue the process of obtaining NYS DOT authority. Over the next several days, I will send you additional information as per our conversation on how to become compliant as a commercial motor vehicle company. Later that same day, he sends a second email. And he sends it to hazylimousine@yahoo.com. From what I understand, due to the fact that you did not address the notice of violation, the registration on your vehicles are scheduled for suspension. That is sent on September 6, 2018 at 4:32 p.m. Mr. Smith is warning Mr. Hussain that his vehicle's registrations may be suspended. 28 minutes later, he gets an email back from Hazy Limousine, signed by Sean. I will contact him in the morning to get it situated. When a bad consequence was about to obtain the suspension of his registrations, Nauman Hussain chose to act. On September 6, 2018, Chad Smith sent another email with a compliance packet to hazylimousine@yahoo.com, similar to the one that he handed to him in March. That second compliance packet is in evidence as well. On September 11, excuse me, Mr. Smith sent an email to Hazy Limousine stating that the DOT information, that is to say Mr. Hussain's DOT information, is not accurate. And Mr. Smith wants that cleared up by September 19. approximately 8 days later. If it isn't cleared up by September 19, 8 days later, Mr. Smith said, I'm going to alert the federal authorities to this, to the fact that your DOT information is improper. On September 18, 2018, Mr. Smith receives a response, a reply email from hazylimousine@yahoo.com. Having trouble figuring out where to go on the registration page to update it, apparently referring to the DOT site. On September 19, Mr. Smith responds to that email. In his email to hazylimousine@yahoo.com, Mr. Smith gives Mr. Hussain two options. That is to say, Mr. Hussain can have Mr. Smith do the work, or Mr. Hussain can call the FMCSA, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Agency, at their main number to see if they can assist him. In his email, Mr. Smith tells Mr. Hussain, if you want me to help you, you're going to have to provide me with some information. And he lists 9 items or so that he needs. Later the same day, Mr. Hussain sends to Mr. Smith the information which Mr. Smith needs to complete or to correct the DOT registration for Mr. Hussain. Less than 1 hour later, after receiving the email from hazylimousine.com, Mr. Smith replies to that email. And the email that he was replying to was in regard to the information that had been supplied to him that he needed to fix the DOT application. Mr. Smith states, thank you for getting these to me. I will forward on to see if this will suffice to get your U.S. DOT registration correctly updated. In that same email, where he thanks Mr. Hussain for sending him the information, Mr. Smith requests some DBA information from Mr. Hussain. Again, that same day, he sends another email. Mr. Smith sends another email to Hazy Limousine requesting information on the drug and or alcohol testing documents that Mr. Hussain has, or suggests that he has. Mr. Smith wants to look at those documents as well. On September 21, Mr. Hussain responds to the request for the documents and says in an email to Chad Smith, hello, Chad. Sorry I couldn't get you the documents today. I have been sick all day. I will have them to you by Tuesday. Thank you, Sean. On October 1, 2018, Mr. Smith sends Mr. Hussain an email at hazylimousine@yahoo.com. The email states, I have not received the requested documents. Please send them to me today. This is October 1, 5 days before the crash. 3 days later, there's a Craigslist ad offering the limousine for sale. 3 days later, October 4, 2018, the limousine is advertised for sale, and it says that it's DOT ready, yet again, 2 days before the crash. On October 1, 2018, Mr. Smith calls Nauman Hussain regarding the drug and alcohol testing documents. Nauman said he would get the documents to Smith by Monday. That would be October 8, 2018. Mr. Smith told Mr. Hussain that Monday, October 8, 2018, was a holiday. He said, okay, get me the documents by Tuesday. And that was their last communication. As of the morning of October 6, 2018, Nauman Hussain had been told many times, at least 3 individuals, that he needed to comply with state and federal regulations in the conduct of his business. The first was Donald Cottrell in 2016. The next was James Pachter, one of his drivers, who said, this vehicle needs to be operating under New York State Operating Authority. And Mr. Hussain said, no, I've got it registered as a passenger vehicle. And the third person was Chad Smith, who had been involved in an ongoing conversation dating back to June of 17 with Mr. Hussain about the need to comply with regulations. Nauman Hussain knew that he had to comply. And he knew why he had to comply. It was made eminently clear to him again and again and again. The evidence showed that he knew. The evidence showed that he had that knowledge. The Craigslist postings from November 29, 2017, January 29, 2018, April 2, 2018, June 6, 2018, July 27, 2018, October 4, 2018, using the letters DOT in an attempt to sell the vehicle. Now I'm going to say knew, and he knew well. Despite having this knowledge, Nauman Hussain created and contributed to a substantial and unjustifiable risk that another's death would occur. He created this risk. He created the risk when he failed to obtain New York State DOT authority, when he repeatedly failed to have the stretch limousine inspected on a semi-annual basis by a certified NYS DOT inspector. If we assume that he put this vehicle into service in June of 2016, had he gotten DOT authority at that time, that would have been one inspection, because you have to have it inspected before you can even get authority. 6 months later would be December of 2016. 6 months later would be June of 2017. 6 months later would be December of 2017. And 6 months later would be June of 2018. That's 5 intensive DOT certified bus inspections on a lift by a trained professional. Nauman Hussain had none of those done. None. If you further assume that he operated the vehicle during that period of time, there would have been one preventative maintenance schedule inspection for each month. That's 27 months. 27 months of the type of inspection that Mr. Kinlan told you would reveal the defects in the brakes. Those are Mr. Kinlan's words. Any inspection would have revealed the defects with those brakes. 5 DOT inspections, 27 preventative maintenance inspections. That's 32 times he failed. 32 times he missed an opportunity to discover the defect in the brakes that could have prevented the accident. 32. He further created that risk of a substantial and unjustifiable risk. He further created a substantial and unjustifiable risk that another's death would occur by failing to establish the preventative maintenance schedule that had to be DOT approved, by the way, by failing to require his drivers to do pre-trip and post-trip inspections, by failing to have his drivers participate in the 19A program, by failing to abide by the admonition of Chad Smith, who stated in his email on January 8, 2018, cease any transportation of passengers for compensation with this vehicle. Those words were still good because as of that date, October 6th, there was still no operating authority for the vehicle. That admonition was still valid. And he further created that risk when he had an out-of-service driver drive the vehicle on October 6, 2018. A driver who never got his P endorsement, as if you refer to the evidence of his driver's abstract and his CDL license. Having created the substantial and unjustifiable risk by willfully, intentionally, and knowingly refusing to comply with the applicable regulations, Nauman Hussain willfully, intentionally, and knowingly chose to disregard that risk. That was a conscious choice of his, to disregard the risk that he had created. When he agreed to transport 17 people for hire in the Ford Excursion stretch limousine on October 6, 2018, the day that he sent that vehicle, that Ford Excursion limousine, to Amsterdam. He sent that vehicle. He knew of the risk. He consciously chose to disregard that risk on that day. The evidence has shown that the cause of the crash was catastrophic brake failure, and Mr. Kinlan has conceded that point. Mr. Chase testified as to his extensive training and experience in the fields of automotive technology and motor vehicle collision reconstruction. He also testified that it was catastrophic brake failure, which was caused by a failure to properly maintain the Ford Excursion stretch limousine, the failure to inspect and maintain and repair. That's what caused the brakes to fail. That's what caused the crash. Mr. Chase found that the right rear brake caliper was inoperable, that it had no braking function whatsoever. The inoperable condition was pre-existing, and it had existed for 6 months or more prior to the date of the accident. The right rear brake on the limousine did not work, and it did not work 6 months at least before the date of the accident, so testified Mr. Chase. undoubtedly, one of the inspections that Mr. Kinlan referred to would have discovered that defect. In fact, any inspection would have discovered that defect. He noted rust, oxidation, and delamination in the swept area of the rotor, and rust was actually embedded on the friction plate, on the brake pad itself. There was rust on the brake pad. It's not even metallic. It's not metallic. There was rust embedded in it. Mr. Chase found that the left rear caliper to be impaired, resulting in reduced braking function to that wheel. So on the rear end of the vehicle, one brake was completely inoperable, the other was impaired. He told us that the steel transverse brake line Exhibit 325, the steel transverse brake line had an obvious extent of rust and delamination, which had he inspected the vehicle, if Chase had inspected the vehicle, he would have recommended that it be removed 2 years prior to the day of the accident. 2 years prior to the day of the accident, this would have been off the vehicle. He identified in this brake line the areas where it failed, where the brake fluid came out of that brake line under pressure as the vehicle descended the hill. He also identified a crimp. A crimp. That was an out-of-service violation. The crimp was an out-of-service violation. And if that crimp had been found, the vehicle would have been out of service until the crimp had been fixed, which would imply the transverse brake line would have been replaced and the accident would have never taken place. He testified that the brake line failed under tremendous pressure. That would have been expected when the driver, Scott Lisanicchia, used maximum force on that brake pedal. And we also saw the result of that. The imprint of the sole of his shoe was on the brake pedal. The rod going from the pedal into the vacuum booster was bent. And the master cylinder, operating properly, had the O-ring depressed into the bore. The tremendous pressure on the brake line caused it to fail because it was in a delaminated and rusted condition. That's visible. That's visible. When the pressure caused the line to break, the brake fluid was forced from the system and all brake function to the rear wheels ceased. Now, because the master cylinder has two separate sections, brake pressure was able to be maintained on the front brakes, but there were no rear brakes whatsoever because of the absence of brake fluid. That there was no brake fluid on the road should surprise no one. We can't see into the brake line in this photograph. Mr. Chase didn't say that you could see into the brake line. He said that it leaked here. We don't know the speed of the vehicle. We don't know the pressure of the fluid in the line. That could have been a fine spray going down the road. Not possible to discern by Investigator Maurer of the New York State Police, who actually walked that distance. Mr. Chase explained that the failure of the brakes, the complete failure of the brakes in the rear, caused the Ford Excursion stretch limousine to rely solely upon the brakes in the front of the vehicle, the front left and the front right, which had impaired brake function due to pitting and rusting of the rotors, and due to, I believe there was some, on the brake pads, there was some, the brake pads had some defects as well. In fact, I think the words he chose were inadequate the brakes were inadequate in terms of brake efficiency and thermal energy transfer attributes. He explained how the kinetic energy of the vehicle going down the hill is turned into thermal energy when the brakes are applied. And the thermal energy transfer attributes of these brakes in the front were compromised. The extreme heat generated from the friction of the inadequate brake system components, and he said the temperature could have reached 1,500 degrees, resulted in brake fade. That's when you're not getting the type of braking function, not getting the type of result that you would expect when you step on the brakes. First it would be brake fade, and then after the brake fluid remaining rather going to the front brakes, once that brake fluid boiled due to the excessive temperature, all brake function would cease in the front. There would be no brakes whatsoever, and the pedal would travel to the floor. And remember the heat generated by the front brakes. On the outside wheels, front wheels, pictures taken from the outside of the vehicle, you see black soot-like substance along the wheels on each side. When he took the wheels apart, when he took the brakes apart, the calipers had a lot of fine dust, gray dust. It was incinerated friction material from the brakes. He said it's like the dust that you find in the bottom of your grill after you've been barbecuing. It's that fine, light gray dust or ash because the brake pads had been incinerated by the high temperatures. Investigator Maurer told us that the excursion traveled down Route 30, dropping over 500 feet over a distance of 9,000 feet. He told us that the Ford Excursion limousine struck the Toyota Highlander in the parking area of the Apple Barrel restaurant. The impact of the limousine striking the Highlander caused the Highlander to move forward at a high rate of speed, striking Mr. Schur, Mr. Schnur, and Mr. Huff. The Ford Excursion stretch limousine then carried on through that parking area, and it struck an earthen embankment on the side of the drainage ditch near that property. That impact caused the deaths of the occupants of the vehicle. In evidence, there are death certificates and autopsy reports for each of these individuals. Mr. Hussain caused the deaths of the victims because he caused the crash of the Ford Excursion stretch limousine. The crash occurred because the brakes failed. The brakes failed because the vehicle itself, including the brakes, had not been properly maintained. The duty to properly maintain the Ford Excursion stretch limousine was Mr. Hussain's duty, exclusively his duty. This was not the duty of Mavis nor any other individual or entity. It was the duty of Nauman Hussain. That duty was his because he chose to operate the Ford Excursion stretch limousine in his limo business. That was his conscious decision. That choice resulted in his being deemed a motor carrier and therefore subject to state and federal regulation. Those regulations established the standard to be met in this case by Mr. Hussain. That's the standard. The standard is statutory and regulatory. It is in black and white. There is no doubt as to what his duty was. And there's no doubt that he was told about that duty. There's no doubt that he was conscious of that duty, if for no other reason, by just looking to the Craigslist ads, where he says this vehicle is DOT ready. Mr. Hussain willfully and intentionally and knowingly refused to meet that standard, time and time again, and by doing so, he acted recklessly, and he caused the deaths of Savannah Devon Bersessi, Rachel Cavosi, Matthew William Coons, Patrick Cushing, Mary E. Dyson, Robert J. Dyson, Amanda D. Hale, Brian Gregory Huff, Abigail M. Jackson, Adam Jackson, Allison A. King, Scott T. Lissanikia, Aaron R. McGowan, Shane McGowan, Amanda Rose Rivenberg, James Joseph Schnurr, Amy L. Steenberg, Axel J. Steenberg, Richard M. Steenberg Jr., and Michael Christopher Ukai. The evidence has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Nauman Hussain is guilty of manslaughter in the second degree, and we ask that you return a verdict of guilty for that charge. Thank you.